finish them.
Humanity has already accepted extinction.
600 warships appeared above Earth in under an hour, locked into a formation so perfect it looked less like a fleet and more like a blade pointed at the planet's throat. No warning, no warp flash. One moment the sky was empty, and the next it was full of iron gods. The Apex Collective had never lost a war in 3,000 years. 41 species had knelt before that fleet, and 41 species had learned that resistance only changed how the surrender was written, not whether it happened. To the Apex, Earth was a rounding error, a species that hadn't even left its own solar system in force, arguing over borders while true civilizations conquered galaxies. Admiral Elena Cross stood on the observation deck of the ISS Meridian, watching the formation bloom across the dark like a flower made of knives. She was 51 years old, silver threading through hair she never had time to dye, and she had spent the last 11 years of her life reading every scrap of intercepted Apex communication Earth's listening posts had ever caught. Not because command asked her to, because she didn't believe in being surprised twice. Her comm chimed. Her sister's voice, thin with fear, cut through half a world of static. Elena, Mateo can see them from the balcony. He wants to know if the stars are attacking us. Elena looked down at the blue curve of home, at the exact patch of coastline where her nephew was standing right now. Probably barefoot, probably scared, definitely watching the sky she had actually sworn, hand on his small shoulder, 3 Christmases ago, that she would keep safe. Tell him, she said, that the stars picked the wrong week. She meant it as a comfort. She didn't know yet that it would become the truest sentence of her life. The fleet finished its formation and went silent, not a threat, a performance. The Apex didn't rush conquest. They let fear do the opening act. Elena watched the silence stretch, and for the first time in 11 years of preparation, she felt something colder than fear settle into her chest. They weren't just here to conquer Earth. They were here to enjoy it. The hail came 4 hours later, translated into flat, synthetic English that still somehow managed to sound bored. This is High Marshal Thren of the Apex Collective. Your world has been evaluated and classified. You will kneel. You will be permitted to live as a tributary species. Resist, and you will be permitted nothing. Elena opened a return channel from the Meridian's bridge, and for one long breath, every officer around her held still, waiting to see if their admiral would beg, bargain, or break. Instead, she laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theater. It was the short, genuine laugh of someone hearing a joke told badly. And it traveled down that open channel into a command bridge that had heard exactly 0 laughter in 3,000 years of conquest. You find your extinction amusing, Thren's voice sharpened, static crackling at the edges. I find your math wrong, Elena said. Ask your fleet to show us what happens to species that say no, Thren obliged. A single beam, thin as a needle from orbit, lanced down and erased a research station on Ganymede's outer moon. 12 scientists, gone in under 2 seconds. The light of it visible from Earth's own night sky like a second dying sun. It was meant to be a lesson. It became something else. Proof burned into orbit that the countdown was real. 72 hours, Thren said. Then Earth burns the same way. Humanity's combined defense fleet launched anyway, 300 ships, everything Earth had built in the desperate decade since first contact rumors turned real. For 11 minutes, it looked almost even. A human strike group slipped past Apex Point Defense and crippled an outer cruiser, and across a dozen bridges, people allowed themselves one breath of hope. Then the Apex fleet stopped playing defense. They didn't fight like a navy. They fought like a closing fist, 600 ships converging with a coordination no human simulation had ever modeled, because no human simulation had ever accounted for a species that had never once needed to retreat. Earth's fleet didn't lose ships one at a time. It lost them in clusters, in seconds, in silence where radio chatter used to be. The Meridian took a glancing hit that threw Elena into a bulkhead hard enough to crack a rib. Alarms screamed. Her tactical officer's voice cracked over comms. Admiral, we've lost 40% of the fleet. They're not even using their capital ships yet. On the view screen, the Apex fleet began drawing back into a new configuration, tighter, brighter, achingly precise. Elena had seen that shape before, buried in 11 years of intercepted archives. It had a name in their language that translated, roughly, to the crown. It was the formation the Apex used exactly once per conquest, the one they used to finish a species that had dared to fight back. Aboard the Apex flagship, High Marshal Thren watched the human fleet fall into ragged retreat and felt nothing but the familiar, comfortable satisfaction of routine. 600 ships began sliding into the crown, a formation of devastating, symmetrical beauty, every vessel locked to its neighbor within centimeters, weapons arrays overlapping into a single kill zone wide enough to sterilize an ocean. It was meant to be unbreakable. It was meant to be seen. What Thren didn't know, what no Apex commander had ever needed to know, because no enemy had ever survived long enough to study them this closely, was that Elena Cross hadn't spent 11 years reading Apex history for comfort. She'd spent it counting every conquest, every final formation, every gloating broadcast the Apex had ever let slip into open space. And she had noticed the one thing their pride made them repeat. The crown was always flown at the exact same interlocking tolerance, ship to ship, because anything looser would ruin the symmetry they were so in love with. Earth had spent a decade quietly seeding the outer solar system with what the world believed were communication relays and weather satellites, 340 of them, dull, ignorable, forgotten in budget reports. They weren't relays. They were graviton resonators, tuned to a frequency Elena had calculated from Apex engine harmonics she'd extracted from a single, careless victory broadcast. They had been sitting there, silent, for 6 years, waiting for a formation exactly this tight. "Fall back to grid delta," Elena ordered, voice steady even as blood ran warm down her temple. "Let them chase us into the array." The remaining human ships scattered in a retreat that looked exactly like panic, and the Apex fleet, arrogant, hungry, certain, surged forward to close the kill, tightening the crown even further to keep the formation intact. On the Apex bridge, a junior officer frowned at a flickering readout. "Marshal gravitic interference localized, rising." "Ignore it," Thren said. "Finish them." Elena's hand hovered over a single control that had waited 6 years for this exact moment. "Fire the array." 340 resonators woke at once, flooding the tight-packed Apex formation with a harmonic that didn't attack their shields or their hulls. It attacked the one thing 3,000 years of unbroken victory had never forced them to protect: the delicate synchronization between 600 engines locked too close together. The crown didn't explode. It unraveled drive core after drive core, losing lock in a cascading, stuttering failure that spread through the formation like a crack through glass, ship slamming gravitational feedback into ship. Hulls buckling from forces their own perfect symmetry had made lethal. On the flagship bridge, Thren watched his invincible fleet come apart from the inside and finally, for the first time in 3,000 years, understood. They hadn't beaten his fleet. They had beaten his pride. The crown formation that had conquered 41 worlds ended above Earth as a slow drifting field of wreckage, lit by the same orbital sunrise it had come to extinguish. 200 Apex ships were gone outright. The rest limped, powerless, waiting for a mercy their own history had never once offered anyone else. Thren's voice returned to the open channel, stripped of its earlier boredom. "How, you told us who you were," Elena said, one hand braced against the cracked bulkhead of a bridge that had somehow barely held. "We just believed you." There was a long silence, then quieter than any Apex transmission Earth had ever intercepted. "The collective will hear of this." "Good," Elena said. "Tell them the coordinates. Tell them exactly what happens here." Word did travel, not just through the retreating remains of Thren's fleet, but outward, ship to ship, relay to relay, across a galaxy that had learned to measure danger by the Apex's conquests. For the first time in 3,000 years, a subject species hadn't just survived a crown formation. It had turned it into a grave. On a dozen worlds still wearing Apex chains, that story spread in whispers that no empire could fully silence. 2 days later, Elena Cross stood on solid ground for the first time in a month, dust from the shipyard rebuild still on her boots, and called her sister. Mateo's face filled the screen before his mother's did, 7 years old and grinning too wide for a kid who'd watched the sky nearly end. "Aunt Elena, did you really fight the whole alien army?" "I told you," Elena said, smiling for what felt like the first time in weeks. "The stars picked the wrong week." She sat down on the porch steps as the evening settled over a coastline that was still there, still hers, still breathing, and looked up at a sky that no longer felt like a threat. Somewhere above her, the wreckage of an empire's pride was still falling, slow and silent, toward an ocean that hadn't asked for any of it and hadn't blinked either. Let the galaxy write it down however it liked. Humanity doesn't win by being the strongest voice in the room. It wins by being the last one still counting.